Okay, perfect. Courtney, how are you?
I'm doing all right. The drive kind of sucked this morning.
Are you driving here to Salem?
Yeah,
to be with us?
I'll be there in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, you are going to be. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so can we start the meeting?
I believe so.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. Time being 10:08 a.m. We will call this Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee meeting to order. We are at the Department of Forestry, ODF headquarters. It says the Tillamook room, but we're actually in the Santiam room in building D. So if you are still on your way, we're not in our normal spots. My understanding, there was a lack of heat in the C building today, so much warmer here. So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for being with us this morning. Let's start with introductions, and tell you what, let's start in the room. And I understand Commissioner Bangs from Clatsop County is almost here, so she should be in the room momentarily. So let's start at the table. Commissioner Woolley.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Jerry Woolley, County Commissioner for District 4, Washington County.
Thank you for being here.
Margaret Magruder, Columbia County Commissioner.
Perfect.
Will Tucker, Lynn County Commissioner.
Mike Wilson, State Forest Division Chief.
Dave Yamamoto, Board of County Commissioners, Tillamook County, as well as Chair of the FPLAC.
And John Sweet, who's County Commissioner, Vice Chair.
Brandon Persinger, Natural Resources for the Association of Working Counties.
Mike Bappo, Senior Forest Economist, Mason Region Gerard.
Good morning, Cindy Colamecha, Western Oregon State Forest Project Manager for the HCP.
Nick Palisato, I'm the Resource Support Unit Manager for State Forest.
Good morning, Ron Zilli, Deputy Division Chief, State Forests.
Morning, Jason Cox, Public Affairs. So yeah.
Perfect. We have two more in the room, actually.
Laura Wilson.
Thank you for being here.
Samantha Hoffman, Executive Support for Wilson.
Samantha. So let me see if I can go down the list here of people we have online. First of all, the panelists. State Forester Mukamoto, are you with us? Oh, you're muted, Ken.
Yeah, good morning, David, Commissioner Yamamoto, and the group. I'm here.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Sorry I'm not there.
I hear
But,
you.
my scheduling was better. I'm here.
Understand. So I also see we have Kate Skinner. Kate.
Good morning. Sorry, I don't know how I got promoted to a panelist, but I'm here. Good morning, everybody. Tillamook District Forester.
Perfect. And oops, so things are changing around on my list here, so I can't follow it all. Commissioner Weiss.
Good morning, Nancy Weiss from Benton County, Commissioner and Chair.
Thank you for being here. And I see we have Commissioner Scar with us.
Good morning, Erin Scar, Tillamook County Commissioner.
How are the volleyball tournaments going?
I'm so sorry to report that Tillamook girls lost this morning. So
Oh,
playing tomorrow. Well, that's right. We'll play tomorrow in the consolation round, but it was exciting to be here.
Sorry to hear that, but thank you for being with us this morning. So I think I have. Things are moving around again. Laura Fredrickson.
Yes, Laura Fredrickson. I am the Recreation Education Interpretation Manager for the State Forest Division.
Thank you so much. And have I missed anyone on the panelist list? Jason, I think I'm good there.
You're good there.
Okay.
I'm watching the attendees to see if we have any more commissioners coming in.
Thank you for that.
If there's any parties you see on there that you want to get.
Okay. I'm
I
just
hate
gonna go
to
down.
interrupt, but what building are we in today?
Building D. So we're on the northeast side of the campus.
Excellent, thank you.
We'll watch the doors as you come in because the door to the lobby is going to be locked, but we'll let you in, I promise. Okay, so I'm just going to go down the list of attendees that I have. Dan Goody.
They won't be able to hear you, or they won't be able to respond back.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm just going to should I go down the list and just list the people that are online as attendees? Not sure how we.
Do, just so we know who's here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got Dan Goody with ODF, Eliana Poole, not sure who Eliana is, no, we don't know. Aaron Olson also. Jason Hazlett, ODF Western Lane Division. Jesse Elbert, also with ODF. Justin Butterus. Kate Skinner, okay, so we've got duplicates on our.
I think Kate got demoted again.
Okay. We've got Kevin Boyd, Marion County GR, Tanisha Rosas. Can we promote Tanisha, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And Tanisha, once you're panelist, you can turn your camera on if you like and unmute and please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Tanisha Rosas and I work with Marion County Board of Commissioners office. So they made sure that they had someone listening and taking notes today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We've got Mike Caparata. We have Michael Lang. Not sure if I've gone through these already. They keep changing on me. Michael Curran, Kevin Boyd, Mike Eliason, Oli Buck, Stacy Detweiler, Suzanne Johnson, Todd Heron, Vanessa Petro, again with ODF. And I think I've gone through that list. See anyone else?
I think you counted everybody.
Thank you very much. Perfect. Okay. So, and so if we have people that want to make public comment and are attendees, how are we going to do that?
So those of you on. So for those of you on the attendee list who are here for public comment, please use the raise hand function. We'll give you a few moments to do so. And we'll have about 3 minutes to let us know what you think. And appreciate again everyone working through us as we made a last minute routine. And again, just use the raise hand if you would like to provide a comment.
Perfect. We're waiting for anyone that would like to make public comment online. I just want to confirm that we did receive 2 public comments before the meeting started. These were over the past couple of days. This is the way we do it in Tillamook County, and I'm not sure how other boards may do this, but written comment received before the meeting, we make sure it gets added to the meeting notes. And so I just want to confirm that we did receive public comment from Jim Fairchild and from
Bob Zyba.
Oh, and Bob Zyba. Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge that we received those 2 written comments. Do we have anyone online that would like to make public comment?
Seeing none, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. So I just want to confirm and let her introduce herself. We've got Commissioner Bangs from Clatsop County. Commissioner.
Commissioner Banks, Clatsop County, and like always, having a talk.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate that very much. Difficult drive this morning. It is, I know. So with that, we're going to go to comments from the state forester. Cal, good morning.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I appreciate being able to meet with the committee today. Yesterday I was in Central Oregon and looking at the landscape resiliency project in the Deschutes County, especially around Sisters. I think very interesting and gratifying to see the activities there. As you know, the landscape resiliency project is a result of the SB 762 and the funding of a grant program, and we were able to put $20 million of grants out that are supposed to be done by June of 2023. So lots of different projects, different types of landowners, small landowners, and also work with the Warm Springs tribe. We'll be going forward on that. But this is a time of change season. This weekend, we're going to fall back in our time, so don't forget to do that. We had the end of fire season just recently. In fact, I think it was probably less than 2 weeks ago. I was up on the Nakia Creek fire, which was our third deployment of our IMT team up to Washington to help out Washington. And I don't know if you live in the you live in the Portland area, you probably were pretty smoked out during that time. Our team was able to deploy and help Washington. They had several fires up there, and within a week, they went from 40,000 homes under some sort of evacuation order to zero. But that's not the whole story. Right after that, we had a good rain event. So I always credit Mike Shaw, our protection chief, for that, because he does it with no additional budget or people. And I think that's just amazing. Of course, as far as the time of change, we are also talking a lot in the state government about the new governor coming on and when she'll come on. And so people are preparing and how to talk, what they want to tell them about their agencies. And we're doing the same within ODF. Also, we're going to be dealing with changes in the legislators. I think there's 40 new members coming in. And so we'll be looking at that too. Looking forward in November, we will be out on the coast with the Board of Forestry. But before that, I will be in Tillamook, and I'm looking forward to this, the meeting with the Salmonberry team, trail team in Tillamook County. And Aaron, are you going to be attending that with us?
Absolutely.
It's going to be exciting, isn't it? We're going to go to that corner with ODOT and take a look at that. And I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion how we go forward. But I'm looking forward. I'll be in Kate Skinner's office for Monday and Tuesday of the week on the 14th. And then the 16th and 17th, we're having a meeting, Board of Forestry meeting in Seaside. And many of the top topics you'll be covering today, such as the HCP, the Marlboro Murrelet and branding, will be covered that day. And Mike Shaw will give a talk about the season. We're also going to have a social, and I'm not sure of all the details yet. That will be coming out today, but we're going to have a social on the night of when is that? The night of the 16th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. with the board. And then on November 17th, we'll have a field tour. I think we're still trying to finalize some of the details on that, but it's going to be a focus on community forestry. So that's what I have to report, Commissioner Yamamoto. If there's any questions, I'm really willing to answer as best as possible.
And we appreciate you being here very much. Do we have any questions for State Forester Mukomoto? Cal, thank you. I'm sorry that commissioners are going to be busy that week. We've got our AOC annual conference in Eugene.
Oh, that's right.
And I understand you're not going to make our annual CFTLC meeting, which I'm sorry you can't make that either. But we promised not to throw too many stones at Mike Wilson.
Okay, well, Mike will be there at AOC, and I think Kyle Abraham will be there, my deputy.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cal.
Thank you, David.
So I just bypassed the Board of Forestry chair, but do we have any Board of Forestry members with us today? Okay, thank you so much.
Chair Kelly sends his regrets. With technical difficulties, he's not able to attend today from the east side.
Right, perfect. So so my opening remarks, I just want to say that how great it is to be back in person again. This is nice to be able just to press the flesh and look people eye to eye. Let's get back to this. I can't say that COVID is gone. I don't think it's ever going to be gone. But it's now endemic, I think, rather than pandemic. And so it's still going to be around. People will still contract COVID. But from what I've seen, it's not a huge deal like it was as it started in 2020. So I'm hoping we can continue to meet in person. I think this is very beneficial for all of us. I wanted to thank the department for putting this first meeting in a couple of years together in this thing. Yeah. Well, perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to go to, actually, we're a few minutes ahead of time, which is perfect. We've got 3 staff presentations. And the first presentation are going to be a discussion of answers to broad HCP questions from the September 7th Board of Forestry meeting. We're going to turn to Nick and Mike.
Thank you. Yeah. So Chair Yamamoto, Vice Chair Sweet, and members of TLAC. For the record, again, my name is Mike Wilson, and I'm the State Forest Division Chief. And Nick Alazado, our Resource Support Unit Manager, is joining me today, and we're going to tag team this presentation. A note on all the presentations that you'll see today. We do continue to work on these almost up until the board meeting itself, and so polishing them and so forth. And so this is pretty close to what you'll see in that example. So at the September 7th Board of Forestry meeting, the Joe Justice brought forward some questions on the HCP, specifically a comparison of net present value and some other economic indicators between alternatives 2, which is the HCP or proposed action, alternative 3, which is some increased stream buffering, and then alternative 5, which was reduced HCAs and increased harvest. And he wanted to know some about that. Chair Kelly requested at that time that that Board Member Justice, McComb, and Ferrari work together to come up with some questions for us that we would then try to answer and bring back by November. So no pressure. I think everybody appreciates the amount of time it takes to put together a board presentation, and that was fairly tight. So we're here today to talk about that. So the questions really ended up centering on economic and environmental outcomes, and then also some questions around risk to species and the questions about the HCP process itself. So I do want to stress it's important to remember that these are all modeling numbers. And so all of the numbers that you'll see today should really be considered in a relative context. I know that's difficult, and we have to scale the numbers, scale the outcomes somehow. And so there are numbers there. But I do want to just reiterate that it is a relative comparison. And so there's a lot of, around that as well. There's a lot of different factors that affect actual outcomes during implementation, some of which are associated with policy choices and some of which are, outside of our control, log markets, climate change, all kinds of things. Right? So, but it is still useful in a high level context in understanding the benefits and the trade-offs among different alternatives. So, the first set of information that we'll cover today really has to do with the economic considerations, and that includes harvest outcomes, cumulative net present value of the alternatives, a little bit about cash flow or revenue flow, and then there was a question around state forest contribution to gross domestic product as well, that sort of resulted from some of the public comment that came out at September 7th. So to begin with, this is the total volume flow by decade under the 3 alternatives. And in gray, we have alternative 5. In blue is the HCP, the proposed action, and in orange is the increased conservation or alternative 3 outputs. And so you can see they start off at a relatively high level, and then they decline over time. So I'll explain that in a minute, but really the key takeaway here is there's not a lot of difference. There's not a big delta here between these alternatives. The increased conservation measures under alternative 3 would result in a reduction of harvest of about 1% compared to the HCP. The increased harvest under alternative 5 would result in an average of about 3% more harvest than the HCP. A word on how this was done. So all scenarios were modeled with, other than the HCP constraints that were applied across those alternatives. The commonalities are that they were all modeled with an objective to maximize net present value using a discount rate of 3%. And part of that decline that you see there is due to imposing a net present value objective. And so that tends to front load harvest, where the model will go forth and liquidate older stands with higher monetary value and regenerate them with faster growing stands or improved stock over time. And so that generally means harvesting older stands sooner rather than later. So another thing to consider here is the modeling. It's not clicking for me there. Jason, try it now. Okay, thanks. So the modeling time horizon, you model things out past the actual end of the plan period, just so that we can ensure that there's sustainable harvest available after the period, the permit term. Or whatever the modeling, or whatever is being modeled. Pretty standard practice. And in this case, you see, as a result of that, beyond the 70 years, we modeled a 100-year time horizon overall for the model. And so harvests increase again as stands regenerate on the landscape and inventory becomes available. So we did not model an even flow scenario. That will be coming with some of the FMP modeling. It's different modeling scenarios, including more of an even flow. It's a little bit difficult, I think, for all of us sitting around the table as, having responsibilities to the public and trying to plan that out. It gets fairly difficult for us to deal with a departure like that in front loading and how we reserve things for a later day and all that kind of stuff. And we tend to go with a even flow actual implementation. So under an even flow scenario, you would expect that these numbers would actually start out a little bit lower, but then also kind of avoid that trough that you see there. And then again, they would stay fairly even as opposed to escalating again after the permit term. Specifically in this, we did control NPV, net present value, to some extent. So, and that was basically a matter of would we be able to even implement it? So the periodic harvest volume was allowed to deviate 5% from period to period, and the model period is 5 years. And then it had to remain within a 10% range of the 100-year average. So that reduces the rate of departure some. And it takes about 70 years for stands regenerated in the early years to become viable again for harvest. So you can see right there at the end of the permit term, those becoming available again, and that coming back up. And harvest was also constrained by requirements around apportioning harvest by certain geographic areas, the North Coast, the Willamette Valley, and Southern Oregon, and also some area regulated stand age requirements and a minimum regeneration harvest age of 50 years old. So when we talk about that stand age requirement on the landscape, we did not having a forest management plan that would actually direct the management outside of HCAs and RCAs for this. We basically told the model to apportion that landscape in a regulated state of 30% of the landscape from 0 to 30 years old, 30% of it from 31 to 60 years old, and then 40% of it greater than 60 years old. And just to approximate some form of management that we might do as a public land. So stand age distributions change over time with that across the permit area. And so this graph that we're starting with right here shows the 2023 beginning condition. The blue bars are the areas outside of HCAs, and the orange bars are areas inside of HCAs. So as the permit term progresses, the distribution of those ages change. And as you would expect, stand ages within HCA's increase in age, while stands outside of the HCA shift to a generally younger age classes. And this is how that kind of happens by decade over time. And so then at the beginning and end, we have these two, we have more of a bimodal distribution, if you will, at the end than we currently do now. As I said, you would expect that. The downward trend of age classes outside of HCA's, that's an effect of the net present value objective. Older stands outside of HCA's may be operationally limited, or the model did not harvest them due to some other constraint, such as that constraint I mentioned about the maintaining 40% of the landscape in stands over 60 years old. And so that's a fairly broad thing, gives a model some discretion in what to do. So I do want to make a note on those blue bars that you see in year 2098, on the right-hand side in the older age classes. So barring other constraints, such as simply not being able to log because of operational considerations, or other things, unless there's some, or maybe there's a drinking water constraint or something like that that's not a part of the HCP, those stands are actually available for harvest until they get up to the age of 175 years old, which is our definition of old growth that we use on state forests. And that's actually current policy and will be future policy, and is actually a part of the plan, is if something's over 175 years old, we won't harvest it. However, a lot of that stuff that you're seeing, you see there's kind of a bump there in the 130 to 160-year-old range there. Those stands are available for harvest. The model didn't choose to harvest them, and this is one place where implementation will look different than what your model results see. And probably what the model did there, and I'm speculating a little bit here, but it's making a choice about what stands to regen harvest and start over and then harvest again later on, while maintaining that 40% over 60. And it might just very well be saying, yeah, no, I'm just going to put that over here. I'm not going to bother with that stand. And that is not the implementation operational decision that we would make. So I just want to make that clear that that bump over there in the blue does not indicate an HCP commitment or other constraint by age alone. Okay, there was a question specifically about harvest inside and outside of HCA's, and so we've talked about management in HCA's in previous presentations, and we have 272,000 acres in HCA's, and we get to do management activities in 75,000 of those acres as the HCP is currently written. And again, just to refresh everyone's memory, that's about 500 acres a year of Swiss needlecast treatments, 500 acres a year of red alder treatment. And I would like to say something here. We're not trying to eliminate red alder from the landscape, and I don't think we could if we wanted to. Just want to be clear about that. But we have a lot of stands, especially in Tillamook, that just are not well balanced in terms of having not a lot of conifer component, and that's just a legacy of the landscape, of course. And then we have 1,500 acres of otherwise healthy conifer treatments. And those treatments are quite variable in their prescriptions. They're not just thinnings. They are what are called variable retention harvest. They would involve a combination of patch cuts, thinned areas that we skip, and it's basically trying to diversify those stands to get that kind of habitat development. But you can see here, it currently in the model it accounts for about 200 million board feet per decade for the first 3 decades of the HCP. And that's marginal compared to what's outside of the HCA's. And again, the reason for going in there is not volume. We're not targeting volume. We're doing habitat enhancement. Nevertheless, that's going to result in some volume coming out of those areas. One of the things I'll point out about this graph any of the small, you notice there's a small amount of HCA harvest out in the permit period after 30 years. That's really just a bit of funk, if you will, in the model. The linear programming model that was used to do the HCP work doesn't fully honor certain spatial adjacency issues and so forth. And so it would report a little bit of volume out of there. That volume won't really be there. Likewise, though, it may be somewhere else, quite frankly. In the FNP modeling that we'll be bringing next year, we will have using a heuristic model that does have tighter spatial controls. So we'll have better. So questions on net present value and cash flow. On the left, you'll see this is the cumulative net present value of those three alternatives. Each of them comes out at about $1.5 billion. The axis might be a little hard to read from here, but those are millions of dollars. And so on the axis, so that's $1.5 billion for each of them. Alternative 5 comes out at about $51 million higher than the HCP. And the net present value here was calculated from net disbursements to counties and includes net disbursements to counties and net proceeds to the common school fund from those common school investments. Net present value does not account, of course, for non-timber land management investments, recreation benefits, ecosystem services, and so forth that people like to have us value, but are a little bit more difficult to quantify than dollars from harvest, right? The figure on the right shows cash flow. All the alternatives decline through that 70-year permit term, consistent with the harvest levels. So no surprise there. And so there is a slightly higher cash flow with alternative 5. Reforestation costs were estimated by the model on a harvest unit basis, rather than being deducted from the Forest Development Fund, as is our practice. In reality, we pay for all of the reforestation, young stand management costs, and so forth, once harvest is completed out of the FDF. But those were handled on harvest unit level. So that would mean that the cash flow to counties would actually be just a tad higher than whatever's presented here. I don't know exactly how much, and the revenue to ODF, or cash flow to ODF, that obviously that money gets reduced by those reforestation costs and our budget. So anyway, more restrictive even flow constraints again here would likely result in lower initial cash flow and overall lower net present value, but a more stable cash flow over time. There was this question around how state forest harvest contributes to county level GDP. And so that's not really a question that we can get at for a variety of reasons, but we can talk about our harvest in proportion to the total harvest within a county. The agency keeps records of total harvest by county, and of course we know our harvest by county over time. So in Tillamook County, that we are about 44% of the timber harvest that happens there. In Clatsop County, we are about 33% of the harvest that happens there. And in Washington County, we are 29% of the harvest that happens there. All the other counties are less than 10%. And that's based on harvest from 2013 to 2020. So then there were some questions associated with risk to species. Oh, actually, I don't have to do this now. I can turn this over. There you go. There's your answer.
So they asked a bunch of questions. I won't cover everything that's in the staff report, but please go check it out because there's the topics I presented today. However, I will be talking about some comparisons of the relative conservation value of the species, the HCA design process and development process, how steep slopes and landslide prone areas would be buffered if alternative 3 were applied, potential changes to water yield and timing from the alternatives, the durability of the riparian conservation areas, and risk to species disturbance. Oh, and also implications of change in the proposed action. Okay. So we were asked by the board to assess the relative risk of the covered species for alternative 3 and 5 relative to the proposed action. An analysis of risk to species is actually provided in the services section 10 findings and in their biological opinions, but important to note that will only be for the proposed action. However, not wanting to get out in front of their work, we chose not to speak in terms of risk, but rather in terms of conservation value. So to do this, we compared some modeled habitat outcomes for the covered species, and we assessed landscape effects of the modified commitments relative to the proposed action. And so here, this is comparing alternative 3 to the proposed action. Alternative 3 calls for increased riparian conservation areas, but the HCAs themselves remain the same, and thus there's no effect on habitat inside the HCAs from alternative 3. The additional stream buffers in moderate landslide prone areas increase modeled habitat outside of HCAs at the end of the permit term. But as you can see here, it's only about 1% or 2%, or about 2,000 to 5,000 acres. And this habitat increase is limited to upslope areas within harvest units. So these are those extra buffers. It's typing out as some of it is typing out as habitat. It also provides, therefore, sort of a minor uptick in connectivity. And to the extent that there are slender salamanders or red tree voles present, it would likely lower take of those species. But overall, pretty limited changes relative to the proposed action. Alternative 5 calls for a reduction in the size of the HCAs and for increased management therein. And when they did the exercise, approximately 23,500 acres of average or better timber production values, these are productive grounds, were removed from HCAs, and then 8,000 acres of low production value were added back in. And so the net reduction was about 15,500 from the HCAs. This resulted in less modeled habitat, not surprisingly, inside the HCAs, and important to know, more outside at the start of the term. And it also resulted in those same effects at the end of the term. So then when you model that out, there's less habitat inside, it ends up being a little bit more outside. Whether or not that habitat outside, as Mike suggested earlier, remains is another question. I focused here really on just inside the HCAs, because the question is sort of what's the effect of the reduced HCAs. And so the total reduction is 7 to 9%, depending on the species. It works out for some reason 17,000 acres each of modeled habitat at the end of the permit term, less habitat. And then we also looked at landscape function, and the modified HCAs generally reduce interior habitat areas and increase edge. There's a little bit of reduction in connectivity among the HCAs in most cases. And there are also some localized effects, since the reductions focused on the North Coast primarily, and were most substantial on the east side of the Tillamook State Forest and on some portions of the Clatsop. So in those areas, there are localized effects. Alternative 5 also increases management inside HCAs and allows for an additional 6,000 acres of harvest of Swiss needle cast infested stands. That's an increase in total management from about 27% to 30% of the HCAs. Increased management in the HCAs will increase short-term risks to the covered species. felt comfortable saying that because that's something we assess on a regular basis. It's a little bit different than the question that was posed around risk. But in terms of relative conservation value, alternative 3 provides slightly higher value in the form of more habitat and more connectivity. But again, that's limited to within harvest units and outside of the habitat conservation areas. Alternative 5 provides, generally lower value because of the reduction in the HCAs, the reduced landscape function, and associated short and long-term effects. Okay, and more interestingly, how do we design the HCAs and what was the process that we used? First, we looked at a number of biological considerations. They were designed in, I should say, they were designed in an iterative process with multiple data sources and multiple layers of review. On the biological side, we looked at species occurrence data. We looked both at current data, current occupancy, and at historic data at the request of the scoping team. For habitat, we used a number of data sources, including our current and projected modeled habitat, with some LiDAR layers to identify vegetation characteristics and topography. We looked at stand ages, and we also looked at complex structure, because of course we already have our stands defined in terms of that. And then we also have the desired future condition designated. So we paid attention to kind of what is the current landscape design and how does that relate to this new one. Important to note that the size and the locations of the HCAs are intended to be robust enough to be resistant and resilient to disturbance. We incorporated a bunch of landscape function pieces in, so we sought to minimize edge, we sought to maximize interior and enhance connectivity. We also looked to distribute it across districts and across elevations. We did consider a number of operational concerns or issues or values, including, this was based on a field-led effort to characterize the harvest potential of individual stands. As part of that effort, they grouped stands into 4 categories: good, average, marginal, and poor. So when I referred to good, average, or better production ground earlier, this is what I was referring to. Some of the things they looked at in developing those categories were site class and the production capability of the stands, logging and yarding methods, so is it cable or tractor, etc. Access to the units and associated haul routes, so how far from main lines, paved roads, and mills. There were some neighbor and local issues, there were scenic considerations, domestic water sources, recreation, landslides. So we really what we tried to do here was we assumed there were no T&E species. We assumed every stand was 30 years old. So it was sort of like, let's even it out, and then let's consider all the additional potential constraints and sort of and benefits and type the ground out that way. So that was incorporated into the HCAs. As far as the process goes, it occurred over much of 2020 and into 2021. And the first step was the development of an ODF biologist-led draft using all of those criteria I just described, and with scoping team review. And then once we had that draft, we sent it to the field, and staff from each district then conducted a review and made suggestions for additions and removals based on their own local knowledge and operability. That then went to division leadership, who conducted their review. Mike and Ron were there, and I was there. John Everingham was there, and Brian Pugh. And that entailed several full days of adjustments, walking through the entire suite of HCAs and considering all that field input. Once we had that, we made some additional post hoc refinements to remove some harvestable areas and include additional operationally limited areas. That then went to the scoping team again, and we made some minor adjustments there to incorporate some older stands or known occupied areas so that we were really down to sort of small portions of the landscape at that point. And then we made some operational boundary adjustments to improve operational efficiencies on both sides of the HCA. So whether you're logging just outside or inside, we wanted to make sure the boundaries set us up well for that. It wasn't perfect, but we did the best we could. And so that is the draft. Then that final draft is what went into the comparative analysis that you've all been looking at. A little bit of a breakdown then for how that plays out. This shows the breakdown of acres inside the HCAs by operability and existing constraints, sort of removing constraints as you work your way down. And so about 635,000 acres in the permit area. Inside the HCAs, there's about 272,000, which represents about 43%. When you pull the RCAs that are inside the HCAs out, you're left with about 37% of the land base. And then you pull inoperables that are inside the HCAs, and you got 29. Existing owl and murrelet sites therein are about 55,000 acres or 9%. We're able to manage that 75 or 12%. So that leaves 50,000 acres that are unmanaged inside the HCAs, or unmanaged but otherwise unconstrained. It's about 8%. And these acres it's hard to tell because we didn't parse between the manageable and unmanaged, but they likely represent, existing habitat of unknown occupancy status. But ultimately, that's really it's 50,000 acres that we're sort of taking off the table as part of the HCAs. The rest are otherwise constrained. Breakdown outside HCAs. So outside HCAs includes about 57% of the permit area. Again, after the RCAs and inoperable areas are excluded, there remains about 300,000 acres. If you combine those acres with the acres we can manage inside the HCAs, you've got about 59% of the permit area. Also wanted to note that there are disproportionate inoperable acres inside relative to inoperable acres that remained outside. So, we've heard a lot of questions like, why didn't you put them all in HCAs? We put a lot in. We had so about 8% of the total acres are inoperables inside HCAs, and only about 3% are inoperable outside. And given the differences inside, that's about 20% of the HCAs are inoperable, 6% outside of HCAs. We included operationally limited acres wherever we could, so where there was biological rationale, given habitat, occurrence, for landscape function. We also included Swiss needlecast and hardwood dominated stands wherever we could. Here I break those numbers down a little bit. I think this is just inside. Yeah, this is just inside the HCAs. And this was a request by Joe, the board member Justice wanted to know kind of what we're leaving on the table. So after inoperables are excluded, there's approximately 24,000 acres of Swiss needlecast infested stands. We can manage up to 15,000 acres over the first 30 years, which leaves about 9,000 acres unmanaged. Worth mentioning that about 1,700 of that is already over 90. I'm not entirely sure why it's typing out the Swiss needlecast. I think it just has it in the stand, but it's a little weird to have a 90-year-old Swiss needlecast stand. There's about 17,600 acres of hardwood dominated stands inside the HCAs. Again, going to exclude those inoperables. And we can manage 15,000 acres of those over the first 30 years. So that only leaves about 2,600 unmanaged. And again, about 2,000 acres of that is over 90. So not leaving a lot of alder that's operable. Important to note, because the scoping team is concerned about both of these activities, that the unmanaged acres inside the HCAs offer baseline comparisons for adaptive management. And the way the HCP is written now, they may be managed farther out in the permit term in consultation with the services. So this gives us, we're going to do the work on the 15,000 acres of each. We have other things to use as a basis for comparison. And, if we demonstrate success and everybody's excited about it, we can talk more about managing the rest of it farther out. That's in the HCP. Another important note is that there are more acres on both stand types outside of the HCAs, and there really are no HCP related constraints. There's the leave tree strategies at the RCAs, but we don't have to conduct surveys. We can be really planful about that, and it allows for more efficient and cost-effective treatment of the acres that are outside. Bear with me, I'm almost done. They asked about, a lot of folks have asked about overlap of habitat inside the HCA. So how much of the different species were additive and sort of to what extent did we piggyback? And we looked at that. There is currently about 125,000 acres of modeled habitat at the start of the term. Of that, about 30% or 37,000 acres type out as spotted owl habitat only. It's largely due to the differences in the species ranges, and so owls are across the whole permit area. Murrelets are limited to most of the Coast Range. Tree voles were only including the population north of the Siuslaw and west of I-5, and so there's more owl habitat because there's more acres under consideration. Habitat for murrelets and tree voles, or both, overlaps with spotted owl habitat on the remaining 70%. So basically the rest of it is entirely overlaps with either both species or one or the other. And that includes about 67,000 acres, or that 54%, that is all three species habitats overlapping. So the point here is there really is no additionality from tree voles and murrelets. And this isn't surprising because one of the driving premises of the HCAs was that covering for owls mostly covers for the other species. So it's like do the work for owls and you're 90% of the way there. All right, a couple slides on riparian stuff. The board asked for info on where and how many steep slopes and landslide prone areas would be buffered if alternative 3 were applied. So this diagram tries to depict that. The top stream in this figure depicts wider buffers on small perennial type N or non-fish streams. And under alternative 3, the buffer on these streams is increased from 35 feet to 50. And that is, that's the dark green here above the light green. So the light green is 35 and the dark green is out to 50. The middle stream depicts a potential debris flow track through a small seasonal type N and into a small perennial type N. The entire reach of the potential debris flow track has an increased buffer of 35 feet, from 35 to 50. Again, that's that dark green in this middle picture. So it just expands the buffer around all of those features from 35 to 50. And then finally, the bottom stream, it's a little bit complicated, but it depicts a potential debris flow track with inner gorges. In these cases, the buffer is extended to the slope break of the inner gorge, which is this area here, this light green that bulges out on both sides, or to 170 feet, whichever comes first. And so here you see the gorge comes first, and on the bottom you see 170 feet comes first. Where there is no inner gorge, the buffers increase from 50 to 35 again. And so if applied across the permit area, the increased buffers from alternative 3 would apply to an estimated 33% of the stream networks. Okay, quickly on water yield and timing. We were asked for more information regarding changes under each alternative. The best available science shows that elevated peak flows can occur with stands less than 10 years old. The HCP included an analysis to identify watersheds, Hucktan watersheds, by evolutionary significant units, is that right? Or groups of ESUs that could experience elevated peak flows associated with timber harvest. So we tried to figure out, okay, what are the basins where we might have an effect? The analysis that was done was to evaluate whether any of them exceeded a threshold of having more than 20% of its area under 10 years old. And that seems to be the threshold for effects. The basins or the watersheds for which we have the largest percentage of ownership in the permit area or within those DSUs occur in the following ones listed there. The Kilchis were 82%, for Wilson 79%, and the lower Nehalem were 79%. And none of those exceeded that 20% threshold in any of the 3 alternatives. So like, our management doesn't seem to affect water yield at time. Regarding durability, there was a question, I believe, from board member Ferrari about how durable the RCAs are. They're designed to be resilient and durable. There are no significant differences among the alternatives in their resiliency or durability. And we did indeed conduct some thermal sensitivity modeling to ensure that all streams with potential for thermal loading are protected by riparian conservation areas. That is all, and I'm going to pass it back to Mike to wrap things up.
Thanks. Yeah, so there were also some comments before me that led to questions around, the risk to species and the fire history, most specifically, but it really applies to all disturbance. And so, the HCP provides for both what are considered for change circumstances, both foreseen and unforeseen. Foreseen circumstances, the applicant has to have a strategy for how to deal with those. Unforeseen circumstances are beyond the applicant's control. Nobody could have seen that coming in the bid. Okay, and that's part of the assurances associated with HCP. So what we did was we looked at our average fire history over the years, and this is over 70 years. What you're looking at now includes the Tillamook burn. Previously, in the draft of the HCP, it did not include the Tillamook burn, but we went ahead and I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Labor Day fires, because it was drafted before then. So we did go back and include the Labor Day fires in this assessment. And what we had in our strategy was that if a disturbance affects 50% of an HCA, an individual HCA, or 5,000 acres cumulatively in a given year, we would have a response to that. And that response is not additional HCAs or anything like that. It's adjusting some of the timing of harvest adjacent to HCAs, basically to provide some refugia for species that may have been displaced by the disturbance. Beyond that, there's no response, right? What we looked at in these averages, that 5,000 more than covers it. If you look at the average acres burned over the entire, actually, do we have the entire average on there, or is it just burned for fire? Well, you can see the average burn for fire is pretty low. And so, we feel like we've got that pretty well covered. We did not include the Tillamook burn in this, as was suggested, I think, in the comments that went to the board. And the reason for that is a couple of things. One, we didn't manage land then. But also it's, really, that was prior to modern day fire suppression techniques. We're much better at putting those fires out. And we've seen that in recent years on the North Coast. We've had a couple of fires that did have occur during east wind and dry conditions, and we kept them small. And that's what we do. And there's no question that ODF, both as an agency and as a land manager, they keep the fire small on our lands to the extent possible. That's for sure. So anyway, the other thing is in the Coast Range, especially the fire return interval, the historic fire return interval is really long. It's several hundred years for a catastrophic stand replacement event. And this is a 70-year permit term. So it didn't really make sense to plan for that sort of thing within this context of a 70-year permit term when your fire return interval is like hundreds of years. So anyway, there's no, as Nick said, there's no real difference in resiliency of ACAs or RCAs and any alternatives. So there was some question around, changes to the proposed action, and the sufficiency of existing analyses within the draft EIS to support HTP finalization of one of the other alternatives or something different than the proposed action. We have a response from Joe Ziza, who works for Fish and Wildlife Service. He's a senior wildlife biologist there, working with us on HCP. And I won't speak for him. His words are included in the staff report. It's actually an attachment to the staff report. And that has been reviewed with NOAA Fisheries as well. So there's a consistent statement between the agencies. And, basically the summary of it is any change in the proposed action does increase the time associated with finalizing the HCP and completing the final EIS and the biological opinions, and then of course, incidental take permit issuance as well. So the further along we get in the process, the more implications that has in terms of timing and what that extension would look like on the timeline. I think I should probably say not just associated with our HCP, but right now we're out in front of other HCP efforts, and the services also have limited capacity. They've assured us, that they would not stop working with us or anything like that, but they do have capacity constraints. And so as the PFA ramps up and things like that, then it would just be a matter of workload for them to do projects. And I'm pretty sure that's the end of this.
Wow. All right. So considering we just got this less than 2 days ago, it's difficult for us to comment. That was just a ton of information. We have not seen the PowerPoint presentation either. I would appreciate that we get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
We will PDF this
as we prepare for our forestry testimony. I think maybe at this table, at least representing State Forest, I think Mike Buffalo is probably the only one that's gone through the vast majority of this information that we received over the last couple of days. I'm just going to ask Mike. Questions, what you've seen today?
I definitely have a few questions on the slides. I don't know if we can go back. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has questions. I mean, I want to defer to you.
Perfect. Okay. Sure. So, I know we're running short of time, but I mean, this is why we're here today, to really try to get the questions that we have answered. Again, I have not had time to go through that stack of materials. Who wants to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. So first is looking at the slides of the harvest levels at the beginning. In light of the forest management plan coming out and a couple differences in modeling, of course, different modeling software, but also just the implementation of the strategies for the FMP and the issue around maybe the 50-year-old regeneration harvests minimum. How reliable are these numbers for thinking about actual harvest off the lands over the next 70 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It always presents a challenge in terms of knowing what future yields are. You know, standing inventory, we have a relatively good handle on. You know, future inventory is certainly really the question, isn't it? How well is it going to grow? You know, one of the things, I mean, obviously we do pursue genetically improved stock. When we're planting, we always try to keep up with that. We are doing work at our seed orchard to try and, you know, have seed stock that is adaptable or adapted to a wide variety of changing climate conditions. And I think that's a key issue of growth associated with that. In terms of how reliable these numbers are, they're reliable as, you know, any model. And, you know, the one thing that we did do from these results as well is we've reduced the volume outputs by subtracting all of the apportion harvest under 10 acres. And that's important with the linear programming model. You know, as you know, well, you know, it respects spatial constraints to an extent, but then it will take a piece of a polygon that you don't have defined, and they'll just like program it to grab some harvest, right? And there was some uncertainty there around, you know, would we really be able to harvest those areas? Well, in some cases, yeah, they'll be adjacent to another unit, we'll be able to, but in some cases, no. And so that resulted in us deciding to take the units of less than 10 acres and not consider that volume in these outputs.
Maybe kind of aside from yields, setting yields and kind of growth aside, just the policy issues around even flow and what the, you know, because there's going to be a change in the constraint in even flow, which will change harvest levels. Like you mentioned, reducing the short term, maybe filling in the gap, but probably overall the sum total over the 100 years probably be lower. Is that the case?
I feel like, you know, basically a long-term average can be achieved. You know, it would lower it up front. We're not doing a departure, I mean, by definition, right? And, you know, what we're really left with then, as we discussed before with Mark, right? Okay, there's a surplus of inventory then that you're carrying that you chose not to do that departure on. And I think that's the part about, okay, in implementation, how do we take that surplus? When do we take that surplus? And so while the model would do it up front to a large degree, we may delay some of that. We want to be careful. We don't want to put it into a condition where we're running into another constraint, like the old growth constraint specifically. But being able to take that in a measured way over time so that there's not this great valley. But yeah, I mean, I view this as taking this and basically drawing a line across that, across that trough, sort of in the middle between the high and low.
Okay, maybe related to that, just the age class distribution. So there was the issue of whether or not, well, a couple questions. Could you put the slide? Would it be possible to get the age class distribution slide up? First, related to harvest of just the older stands. It sounded like that's actually possible. Like there might actually be more harvest in of older stands implemented than the model is showing. And is that something that would be changed for the FMP model to better reflect what the department might do around older stand management?
Yeah, and put this down.
Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, if you could just go, that one right there. Okay. And so, you know, what we're looking at there is when you see those stands that are getting out there in the blue outside of HCA's and they're getting up into that range, we aren't going to let that happen. Unless, like I said, they're on inoperable ground or they have, you know, some other constraint like, you know, a drinking water supply or something like that, which are fairly small and site-specific issues. And I want to be really transparent about that. And I'm being very transparent about that with trying to be with everybody. But that is the expectation. Look, we are making what we feel is a significant contribution to conservation to fully offset and mitigate the take that we'll have by harvesting some of these stands. And so we have the full expectation that we will be harvesting those over stands. And so we do the best that we can in our FNP modeling not to have any unwritten rules, you know, and just really hold the line on policy and say, no, we're not going to harvest that. No, we're not going to set those aside. Yes, we're going to harvest those.
Certainly to the extent that you people bring back old model results and show you what you said before. Having the model reflect what you're going to do is, would be very helpful, right? So if you think you're going to harvest those, I think reflecting that in the FMP modeling would be pretty helpful. Another question on this is actually related to this, the 2023 numbers here, because the age class distribution inside and outside the HCAs is actually, it's not that much different. There's a little bit of a skew towards a little bit older stands inside the HCAs, but there are substantial numbers of acres of younger stands inside the HCAs, and many of the species that are being covered in the HCP are tend to prefer older stands. So why is it that the HCAs look essentially like a cross section of all the lands that ODF manages?
Yeah, a little, there are definitely a component of younger stands in there, and those are areas that are, basically our landscape is not currently bimodal in this fashion of, conservation areas and production areas. So when we're designing an HCA that encompasses a block, there's some other things that fall in there as well. And those are good candidates for habitat growth. Just like the candidates in the blue bars outside, the stuff that's 80 and 90 years old there, you see those blue significant bars outside are candidates for harvest. And so when we think about it over time, and there's a provision in HCPs around stay-ahead requirements related to commitments. Basically, the not front-loading all of your take. And so that growth of habitat in the future is important as well. So anyway, but it's a landscape design function. Right. Primarily, when you look at the smaller HCAs in areas where really our lands are much more smaller or scattered, and we're playing more of a support role for federal lands, you'll see the composition of HCAs is a little different because we can't, having a 100-acre HCA that encompasses 50 acres of young stands doesn't really achieve that objective versus some of the larger areas that we have designated, and where we don't want to have a bunch of Swiss cheese.
Right. So, but with meeting HC the HCP requirements, you can do mitigation or you can do minimization. So by allowing the harvest of these older stands, is that essentially increasing your take up front and then require you to provide more mitigation later, resulting in overall a larger footprint for the HCP.
Well, so the harvest of those older stands being recognized in the analysis, and that'll be fully addressed in the biological opinions, I'm sure, is how this plays out. We're able to, that's basically where we're saying, no, this commitment basically mitigates that.
Okay. One other thing about this slide is this is inside the HCAs and outside the HCAs, inside and outside the HCAs. But it sounds like there's a lot of inoperable lands that are outside the HCAs as well that you went over. And so I don't think the blue bars are reflecting the harvest of older stands here, because there's going to be older stands that aren't available. So is it right? Right. Is that right? So it's actually hard to tell here what's going on in terms of harvest outside HCAs.
This slide I presented says it's about 20,000 acres inoperable out there. And so if you look at all those old blue bars, like the 140 class, that's the 20,000. Just take that, subtract that out, you still have all those other. So it's a mix. There's all those other acres out there that are not inoperable according to our current analysis.
In 2023.
Yeah. No. Yes.
I'm looking at the 2023 bar or not. Yeah.
Oh, you're looking at the 2023 bar.
The 2023 graph, like it's not clear what of those older stands are actually available for harvest, because this is just about HCAs and not about the entirety of management.
And I would say currently those that are on inoperable areas, that whatever that percentage is probably mostly lying there in the 80 and 90-year-old age class. You're seeing all those things that might be in the 70-year-old age class too, because almost all of them want to look, and so almost all of them are in the age range.
Are you kind of moving on? Go ahead.
Let's go back and forth here.
Yeah.
Questions kind of killing me actually. So you've noted the drinking water sites, and you've noted the inoperable areas being outside the HCAs. And I guess my question is why? Because those areas obviously have social concern or operational concern, and those areas will more than likely reach habitats. So why were they not included in your HCA's?
So a lot of them are. Yeah,
But 20,000 acres aren't. And so that's 20,000 acres of jobs, in my opinion. And I've already stated that 100 acres equals 1 job for 1 year. And so if we are looking at 20,000 acres that are inoperable and not part of the HCA's, and they could have been part of the HCA's, I feel like that's weighting this against the counties, just in regard to economic. And so because, and I'm just going to point out yet again, because we weren't in the room to raise these concerns prior to dropping this plan with services, I feel like I feel like I'm frustrated. And it's been for Commissioner Yamamoto and myself for the last 2 years have repeatedly asked to be part of these negotiations, these conversations, so that we could raise these concerns and then have an answer, hopefully, you know, and participate more than once a month or once every other month, or for a number of months, not at all. And so I guess why were they not included, or did you just not know about them?
So not all of them, and Nick can speak to this more, not all of them are actually positioned well to be included in HCA's. But one thing I would point out on this slide and the delta between alternative 5 and the other alternatives, two alternatives there, is, you know, that is largely reflective of those inoperable areas. Not knowing exactly what the HCA's revisions were that the services chose to implement, haven't looked at those myself, but we do know by their description in the draft EIS that they swapped out operable for inoperable ground. And so that's what that delta looks like, sort of.
And so bringing this up here, why is the no action data not included? And have we remodeled that no action data to take out the poison pill conditions, TNT exposure?
No, we haven't done any remodeling at all, and the board request was to look at these 3 alternatives.
And that's it. And so then we have no comparison to no action.
And that's a small side point too, is it, like, so operations limited this term field prefers as opposed to inoperable. And that is our assessment today, and it may change through time. And there's a number of reasons why they're designated as such. And sometimes it's, we don't have a road anywhere nearby and we're not going to build it anytime soon. That doesn't mean the road will never be built there. Or there's the technology that we have today doesn't allow us to allow changes. So I don't expect that all of those things, that all of those 20,000 acres that we call inoperable today are going to remain so 7 years.
Okay, so I'm just gonna circle back to the question of why we've had no county representation in this conversation.
Courtney, I think we need to move off of that. I mean, it is what it is. We did ask, we continued to ask. And we got the answer no every time. So I'm not sure we're gonna get an answer to that. Mike, you had other questions?
Can I ask 2 more, just in the interest of time here, on well, kind of generally on a number of slides, just this issue of risk and the risk assessment, and or on slide 16 have a list of things that were reviewed, biology considerations, scenic considerations, and I'm curious with the letter, actually the letter from NOAA that discusses the risk of delay. There's not in this discussion, it seems, a analysis of significance of that risk, and I appreciate that there is more, there's risk around each of these items, but how are those, there's risk to the counties with reduced revenue, how are the significance of the risk, say, of scenic impacts assessed? How are they assessed in the pre-development stage of the ACAs?
The risks of?
Well, the risk, like on slide, maybe go back to slide 16. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Risk
So, like, for the most part, each of those variables had its own set of subcategories, including scenic. So we have our current scenic classification system. We haven't determined our scenic policy moving forward, right? So that's important to know, but this was more about trying to just, you know, if you envision this as a sort of color scheme where green is go, 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 you know, and red is no, no. We're just trying to get a sense for any given stands, like, you know, suite of constraints. Scenic wasn't a huge driver in that.
I mean, maybe not for now, but just in general, that like what constitutes red, what constitutes green,
Yeah,
that
and
kind
so
of-
there's a nice little write-up that I think Jody Kroon did of sort of how each of these are then subdivided. I'd be happy to share.
Last question on slide 18, which is a good breakdown. I think this is the first breakdown I've seen like this, but maybe it's been out before. So at the bottom two lines there's the managed lands inside the HCAs and the remaining unmanaged. But since they're not captured by any of the other lines, those would be manageable, except for the HCP. Is that right? So is the way to read this that there's 20% of the total ODF land base is made unmanageable due to HCAs?
That 20%?
Yeah, the sum of the, or is the five, so that's a good question. Is the 51,000 part of the 75,000 or those two separate?
They're separate.
So I can add them
there's
together.
So there's 126 acres floating around. We could
Which is 20%
manage 75,000 of it, and so I didn't parse out this by habitat, which would have been maybe the next logical step to get at. Well, those 50,000 acres are all really high quality habitat and you know, we're gonna focus on the 75 instead.
So that's different than like the inoperable one.
Yeah, yeah. Each of these are exclusive of the others. Right. And moving downwards. And so you pull out all the other constraints, you've got 50,000 available, otherwise available, but for the HCP constraint.
Okay, but then that 75,000 that's managed within the HCAs, if you go to the next slide, I mean, that's of course a different kind of managed than these operable acres. Right?
Yeah,
That's,
so I mean, this
that's
is
a highly limited management regime of potentially one thinning activity. In the next 30 years.
I mean, so 30,000 of the 75 is regen harvest, but that's Swiss neocast and alder. So yeah, less volume presumably.
Yeah.
And then the 45 is thinning, and so yeah, certainly less volume than clear cuts outside of HCAs.
Okay. Okay. So it's but it's not 125,000 because you think there's high quality habitat there. Then you know what's sort of like what's the delta here? What's being taken off base by the
I'd have to
HCAs
look
here?
at it. I mean, so assume it's the 50, with the caveat that we like have carved out space to have further discussions with the services further out, contingent on the efficacy of the treatments, right? So if everybody loves what we did, everything's progressing beautifully, we can go back and demonstrate that and have a conversation around those 50. I don't think it would be the 50, but you know, we can have a conversation around more.
And it might really hinge more on re-entry on things that we worked on already. So we go in year one and do a Swiss neocast treatment. The conversation really might, after 30 years, might hinge more on what else do we need to do in there to continue to spur the habitat growth and that sort of.
Well, actually, we put in there that we would be able to re-enter those stands too, and that doesn't factor into the total. And so the number of entries into a given acre isn't a factor in amount of management allowed, right? It's like manageable acres, not single entry. Okay.
One more, we're way behind. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yes, sorry.
It's just in regards to the riparian zones that you had up there. So with the private forest accord, they chose slope in order to address the riparian zone. So why did the Florida Department of Forestry choose horizontal in the measurement of riparian zones, which when you do geometry, that could equal an excess of acres that is really unnecessary scientifically?
We've always used horizontal distances in our buffers. They're generally easier to lay out that way, for one thing. And the other is, that's just where the conversation went. We went there with full knowledge that in different types of ground that would equal different types of buffers. And it was actually key in keeping our potential for reflow buffers at 35 feet, as opposed to something larger, because recognizing that steeper terrain, that those would add cover time.
I guess my observation is I see it as a reflection of having no actual industry discussion and circling back to always trying to find acres around the edges of everything that you're serving in order to be able to save jobs. I feel like when I add the excess 20% that you cited in a graph in previous meeting, and then the 22,000 acres, and then the horizontal line of sight buffer, I'm seeing exponential job losses unnecessary. So, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, so I'll ask in the room, do we have any other questions that we want to ask before we move on? And I should ask also of the panelists that we have online. Anyone online as a panelist have any questions they would like to ask at this point? Okay, we have some catch up to do here. So our next item, gonna be another long one.
It's not, I'm gonna get through this quickly.
Well, we'll see.
It's only 7 slides.
Marbled Murrelet Endangered Species Management Plan. Again, Nick and Mike.
Yeah, sure. So we'll be bringing this to the board in a couple weeks. Vanessa Petro, our lead wildlife bio, will be presenting. And she goes into much more detail than I do here. That detail is also in the staff. So I tried to keep this just to like points of relevance for us to discuss. See how much. Quickly to provide some background, in July of last year, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission voted to uplist murrelets from threatened to endangered. That decision triggered a statutory requirement for state land owning and managing agencies to follow mandatory survival guidelines and develop an endangered species management plan for murrelets, which is why we're here. In November of last year, the Fish and Wildlife Commission identified ODF as an agency that can play a role in the conservation of the species. And once that's determined, it's each agency's responsibility to determine their actual role themselves. And in determining that role, we are obligated to balance the statutory requirements, rules, and policies applicable to the management of state forests. So murrelets are very much within the context of GPV when we consider our role. Social and economic impacts that conservation would have on the state, the conservation needs of the species, purpose of the land, role of other ownerships, particularly public, state fed. And then these factors need to be balanced, consistent with the biological aspects of the species management identified by ODFW and our own statutory purpose and constitutional obligations. So in March of this year, I brought our recommended role, ODF's recommended role, to the board for approval. That role was a contribution to conservation. The board approved that role, and that's to differentiate between our role as conservation, it's a contribution, or it's take avoidance, or something else. We landed on a contribution, and I'll explain why in a minute. And we've been developing the Endangered Species Management Plan to provide justification for that, and Vanessa will be presenting it to them in November, to the board rather, sorry. So our response to the statutory requirements to develop a plan for murrelets needs to address the following 7 requirements for contributing to the conservation species of the species rather. What state land is covered by the plan, what role we'll play in the conservation of species, how we will manage the state land to achieve that role, how we will monitor implementation, how we will assess and review the plan and when, how our plan relates to other state and federal agency plans or other recovery efforts, and what process the agency used in developing the plan, including review and approval. For the sake of brevity, I'm only going to cover the first 3 today, but like I said, we'll go into greater detail at the board meeting, and the plan should be available for your review already. It's not a global diversity.
Although Nick, I'd love to hear your comments on number 7 at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can speak to that a little bit. So we've been working with ODFW pretty closely. We've been coordinating with other state agencies. So DSL, OPRD, ODOT, one of the aviation agencies that got wrapped in, and somebody else. So we've been working closely, and we're kind of providing a lot of guidance to the other agencies that don't have a lot of experience. And I mean, that's essentially been it. We've just been like working on the plan internally and then vetting it to the board and now to everybody else. I can talk more about it when we get done. Quickly on the covered lands. So the plan covers all lands managed by ODF within the range of Merowetz. You can see that there. It's the tan outline. It's basically the Coast Range, except that the range sort of cuts west down south, and so some of our, like our Glendale block and some other stuff falls out. Regarding the covered lands, we play a disproportionate role in Merowetz conservation. Our lands comprise less than 4% of the forest cover in the Coast Range, yet just over 16% of existing habitat is on these lands, according to the most recent federal monitoring effort. The Tillamook and Clatsop obviously play important roles on the north coast, but our lands are scattered and smaller elsewhere, and thus our ability to contribute varies depending on locale. Important to note that Merowetz are a seabird that comes inland to nest. Jim Rivers at LSU likes to say these are a bird of two worlds. And what that means for us is we have very little capacity to influence marine habitat threats such as availability of prey and oil spills, etc. And thus the limitations of our land base and the species ecology are such that we can't recover Merowetz on ODF, that can't occur on ODF managed lands alone. What we can do is help arrest declines and improve habitat conditions, and thus contribute to positive trends overall.
So Nick, I just want to correct you there. We're not trying to arrest decline. We're not having declines.
Yeah,
We're having increases.
I think I made that
year.
We make that point.
Thank you.
That means continue to arrest declines, I guess. Maybe. I don't disagree. State forests define the role of ODF managed lands as contribution to conservation. That is basically designed to support stable or increasing population and habitat trends by protecting occupied habitat, improving habitat conditions. And it's based really on this is, so important to note, the current framework for this plan, we don't have an HCP. And so the framework is our current take avoidance policies and the other commitments we're already making under the FMP.
Under the proposed update to the FMP?
No, under our current
current
2010 FMP. And so I think I explained that somewhere here, but we're growing 30 to 50% of the forest is designated to go to complex. We have plans to avoid take. Together, they represent a contribution to conservation. Our current policies align with the survival guidelines that are considered essential to ensure the survival of individual members of the species. At the federal level, our take avoidance policies that designate and protect habitat, in addition to our FMP, also support several recovery actions described in the Fish and Wildlife Service Recovery Plan. Under these policies, we survey timber sales, we designate and buffer occupied habitat following established protocols and in consultation with ODFW and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Some quick stats on that. We've conducted over 32,000 individual surveys at more than 1,300 unique sites. It's the largest survey effort for Merowetz in the lower 48 by any land manager. Our surveys have covered over 98,000 acres or 17% of our managed lands. and have resulted in 113 marble murrelet management areas to date, totaling about 20,000 acres. Our current plan includes goals and strategies intended to achieve a balance between available resources and greatest permanent value through a system of integrated management that includes consideration of murrelets and other species of concern associated with older forest structures. And so under the plan, 30 to 50% is targeted for a desired future condition of complex. Currently about 72,600 acres type out as complex forest, layered or old forest structure, and have potential to be providing habitat. The forest management plan also includes requirements for leaf trees and riparian areas that management of riparian areas for mature forest conditions. And while, you know, this full suite of strategies may not always result in habitat, the plan still represents a big contribution to conservation beyond simply take avoidance, which is why the board approved it as such. So our recommendation to the board will be to adopt the plan as drafted and as attached to the staff report for November. And next steps would be to, if they approve the plan, we will bring it, well, we have to, regardless, our deadline for bringing it to ODFW is January of 2023 to their commission, who gets to approve, review and approve the plan. They have 6 months to make that final decision. But it's important to note that the commission may choose to approve the plan as submitted or make modifications consistent with the role that we stated, but also with the biological needs of the species. So that's when things can get interesting. A couple other points worthy of note: the commission approved plan for murrelets would supersede the survival guidelines that we're now living under. And an HCP with a federal incidental take permit waives the murrelet plan requirement. That's it.
Open it up to questions. Great.
So you've noted you were already following murrelet plan requirements here at ODF. So my question is, can you continue those policies for 5 years after you enact the HCP so that when or if ODF realizes that they've defunded the department or you've defunded too many counties, that we can effectively break contract and then hopefully not have to pay for the fact that we weren't doing take avoidance for those 5 years?
So we do intend, we haven't determined what our survey season looks like in 24, let alone 5 years out. But there is discussions around, do we want to keep surveying timber sales for, you know, a couple, 2 years, whatever the protocol is, as a gut check early on to make sure everything works out. We've talked about it, we haven't landed on that specific proposal. That would be very expensive. It would cost us about $5 million on top of our what we would have to spend for HCP monitoring as well. But it is like it's in discussion, I guess.
Yeah, typically, so when an applicant chooses to, it's complicated when an applicant chooses to, pull out an HCP. I don't think, as I recall, it wasn't too terribly onerous with the Elliott when we did that, as a result of not being able to successfully amend that HCP at the time. But really, I don't know that it would be necessary to fully implement our take avoidance policies. It would be really a discussion around how much unmitigated take had happened in that short period. And so that's why, this is one of the reasons they don't like to have take front-loaded in an HCP, is because an applicant could pull out, and then there has to be a very difficult situation, a discussion there about, oh, now what do we do? Given just our general pace and scale of what we do, I don't if we were 5 years in and had to abandon the HCP, I don't think that there would be that much unmitigated take calculated. It would be calculated on a habitat basis for anything that was not already surveyed.
And then just following survey questions, our survey season is now closed. My assumption is, considering it's now winter. Was there an uptick in T&D population, specifically owls, in the counties that are still reserving circles that have been abandoned?
I don't believe there was.
No, there was, we got a bunch of parallels, a couple districts, but no outsides.
And then just maybe it's my final question, I don't know. So during one of your most recent SBAC meetings, staff mentioned that you were still negotiating the HCP. And I was just curious what those negotiations are entailing, and can we participate in those negotiations?
At this point, there's no negotiations over anything major in the HCP. It's really about minor things around adaptive management and such as that. So basically, there's been some, and it's not out yet, the final draft of the HCP. You can expect to see some increased language around how we would respond to salvage and fuels management issues inside of HCAs. That's been brought up a number of times. And to be clear, fuels management inside of HCAs is still primarily focused on the non-habitat or lower quality habitats in the HCAs. However, and salvage also, but both of those things we've left to somewhat of a consultative process for the services, in that coming up with those prescriptions, or what is the threshold for salvage versus not salvage, and what does that salvage look like inside of an HCA compared to how you might do it on the state. Better to have those discussions on a side-by-side basis, as opposed to trying to be overly prescriptive about it and having, quite frankly, not agreement at the end of the day on being able to do anything. But there's not consideration at this point of major changes to the HCP unless otherwise directed.
I just would love a few major changes to, save a few hundred jobs, a few $1 million, actually more than a few $1 million. So, and I guess that circles back to my final, statement is, now that the Lynn County suit is over, or effectively over, and that was originally the excuse that was used to not allow us to participate in discussions, which I felt was kind of disingenuous, because Clatsop County was never involved in that. Will that door open more for us in these negotiations, in these conversations regarding sites and like locations within my area?
So I don't actually see a role in the scoping team for that. And just to be clear, we didn't cut off opportunities for engagement during the Lynn County lawsuit.
And it was just cited in public meetings that was one of the reasons why we weren't talking.
We couldn't discuss it
Right.
on advice of counsel.
And we did have Oregon consensus. Brett Brownscombe tried to reach out to the counties directly so that we could continue that conversation respectfully. Although the counties really had a hard time engaging with us because of their counsel at that time. And just on the heels of that, so that started in September of 2019. Prior to that, we had been engaging the counties. We went out to lunch after a lot of the FTLAC meetings. We went to Association of Oregon County meetings. So we were really trying to lean into that. And then when they resumed in 2021, we certainly resumed with the counties.
Okay. So there's a narrative of engagement, and there's a narrative of actually having us participate in decision making and being able to bring to you our concerns. And you engage with all kinds of special, entities. And
did as part of
we're not a special entity, we're supposed to be a partner. And so I guess the narrative that is circulating is that we have participated in this, and we have not. And I think I want to just make that narrative very clear, that we have not been allowed to participate.
And we do have documentation of our public process and all of the meetings that we have had as well.
And again, the documentation of your public process of engagement is basically a pandering of the public. And And you can take note of every email and so on and so forth, but that doesn't equate to actually being able to participate in decision making.
And I want to stop this discussion right there, but yes, the history is not good as far as the Council of Forest Trust Land counties go. There were times early on in this discussion where we were treated not as partners, but as other than partners. Seems like the environmental community, other communities had recreational community, had more, if the same, if not more say than the Forest Trust Lands Advisory. That's why we continued to ask over the years to be included on the scoping team and or others, and we were just honestly told no every time, and with no discussion. So again, let's just drop it right there. Okay. One comment that you just made, Mike, you see the HCP continuing on as it is now, unless directed otherwise. Who would direct you otherwise? Only the board?
At this point, yes.
Not the services?
No,
Not the governor's office? Not the legislature?
I don't. So those entities have not been that, I mean, the governor's office is aware and supportive of the HCP effort.
There's going to be a new governor soon.
But hasn't, really been engaged in that.
I understand.
Yeah. The board is really the authority there.
So one other I want to throw in that mix is the state forester. What powers does the state forester have when it comes to the adoption of the HCP? Cal, are you still on the line?
I'm here.
Here you go.
What was the question, David? What powers the state forester has in the adoption of the HCP?
Yes, we're talking about, if directed otherwise, it looks like the HCP is just going to continue on. So we've had conversations about legislature, governor, board of forestry, and I'm sorry, but I threw your name into the mix also.
Well, I think I would probably be the director who would be signing off on the documents with the services, but I think that would have to be approved by the Board of Forestry. Correct me, Mike, if I'm wrong on the approval.
Yeah, so the process isn't really one of approval regarding the HCP or the incidental.
For acceptance, yeah.
That's accepting those permits, and that's, board direction would say state forestry acceptance. And, when we talk about Cal's role, sorry to speak for you, Cal. But to go in there and, looking at how the board supervises all of these things and delegates that to the state forester, but they still supervise the state forester. And so it's really whatever policy direction the board wants at the end of the day is what we follow.
Yeah, and the relationship between the state forester and the board is they direct me in policy decisions. I am, I have that ability to consult with them and have a discussion, but when it comes to policy, they're going to be giving the direction. When it comes to operations, that's different. That's in my ballpark.
Thank you, Cal. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're very late. We've got one more topic for staff, state forest branding efforts. We'll turn it over to Mike and to Laura.
Okay, and so again, everyone, Laura Fredrickson is here to give us a brief presentation on what we'll see at the Board of Forestry meeting, not the reveal itself, actually, I assume. But Laura, for those of you who don't know her, is our Recreation Education Interpretation Manager. And so this effort was stewarded by her shop. And I'll just, with that, I'll just have you take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Due to the time constraints, I'm just going to verbally walk you through giving you an understanding of where we are at in terms of developing a brand for the State Forest Division. Roughly 5 years ago, there was mention of the need to develop a state forest brand that was coincided at the time that the State Forest Division was reorganized. Understanding the importance of trying to educate the public primarily about greatest permanent value, and also to distinguish ourselves from the United States Forest Service and other neighboring land managing agencies. It was in 2021, a year after I joined the agency, which we immediately went into a shelter in place, as you all remember, due to the COVID pandemic. 2021 is when we actually were able to move out on it, and consulted with several different branding and marketing firms, selected one through our normal processes in terms of going with Oregon Buys, complied with all of those guidelines, selected Meet, which is a small boutique marketing firm located in Portland. And we started with stakeholder interviews that were conducted by the two creative leads from Meet, interviewing over 40 individuals, both within the agency, outside of the agency, user groups, Board of Forestry members, to broadly get a better understanding of how they viewed state forests. From there, the interviews were distilled down, and the interview team actually then provided us with another setting where we actually looked through those interviews, determined kind of the look and feel that we were looking for, or that was emerging, I guess you would say, from those interviews. At that point, the creative team went to work. They presented us with several different options. I will say that it was pretty narrow once we actually dug into it, and that was due to the fact that one of the mandatories that we had to comply by is when we are using a state forest logo, we do need to be positioning it next to an ODF logo. So we needed to have a logo that was complementary in terms of the color palette, also making sure that it highlighted the ODF logo and didn't overtake it. So a number of limitations, I guess I would say. What the marketing firm derived for us was actually what's called a logo lockup, which essentially is a typeface treatment that has been, people think of a brand and they think of Nike, which is the swoosh. Ours is simply a typeface treatment that complements the ODF logo. I will say it was vetted internally as well as run before our executive team of the agency, State Forest Division leadership, widely disseminated through the district in terms of district support, and has been very well received. We are positioned to give that a reveal, if you will, at the Board of Forestry meeting being held in Seaside on the 16th. I don't have a full PowerPoint presentation due to the time limitation, but I just wanted to make sure that members of FTLAC were aware that a board or a brand and tagline have been developed to really start moving out on educating folks about state forest, and that we are actively managing our state forests. Future plans do include, similar to our sister agency, Oregon Parks Recreation Department, we do have future plans to apply the standalone logo and tagline to merchandise, and actually at some point move into e-commerce to generate additional revenues. So I think I will stop there. I'm looking at my computer clock and it says 12 o'clock. I want to honor everyone's time. Happy to take a few questions, but I do not want to keep you over the allotted time.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. I know that we had a brief discussion about this, it was a week ago. And I think there could be some ongoing heartburn about this whole thing. But I don't know how much time we have to discuss it today. Questions, comments?
I have a couple if I could.
Sure.
Laura, this is Brandon from the Association of Oregon Counties. There is a statute that I know the department is well aware of harvest revenue being shared with the counties. Is there an intention or a plan for the department to share any revenue that comes from this branding effort with the counties?
Brandon, my understanding is because it's not deriving any revenues off the land. At this point, that is my understanding. This is actually on merchandise.
I'll tag on to that a little bit. There is that fact that Laura just presented, but then also really the concept behind the merchandising here is to better support the recreation, education, interpretation program, and kind of take some of that pressure off of other funds derived from timber harvest to be able to basically increase our ability to implement.
So I believe that this is coming from the REI Strategic Plan 23-26. And in that document, it talks about funding efforts would include partnership opportunities, merchandising, brand licensing, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a plan to bring some of those contracts before FTLAC for review?
Brandon, I'll be honest and say we haven't gotten that far. That is a strategic plan. We're still in the process of really building it out. I will certainly note that. It is noted, but you know, the strategic plan, as you will note on the date, is still relatively new and we are in the process of building it out. So, but I'm noting your request there.
And then just one last one. And I think this is probably for Mike. I noticed in the agency's budget submittal, POP 101, which is additional funding for REI efforts. If the legislature chooses not to move forward with that POP, what happens with this program?
So the program ends up kind of being in a status quo. You know, there was a couple of things with that. We have folks that do, and that was focused on the education and interpretation piece of the REI program. We have not been successful in the past trying to garner dollars for recreation. And so that's, we took a slightly different approach here. And there's two pieces to it. One was we do have a lot of people who are involved in education and interpretation. So some of it was a fund shift in some positions to bring in some general fund dollars to their position, but then there were also new positions that were going to be dedicated to education and interpretation, and also being able to, and some basically a van and a mobile unit to be able to take our message on the road a little bit better. So if that doesn't happen, we just don't get that extra capacity.
I probably have more, but I'll send them due to time. I'll send them to you in an email, Mike, but thank you.
And of course, when we first heard of this, our biggest initial concern was that is this program going to lead to even more harvestable forest be taken out and put into recreational land? Mike, I think you told us that because of the recreational immunity that you currently have, because you don't charge for forest use, that probably would not happen. But again, just be aware that we are very concerned about this kind of a jumping off starting point. And trust counties are very concerned about moving forward. If the plan is indeed to start bringing more and more of our state forest lands into recreational avenues, especially when you're not charging for it. Again, we own a lot of campgrounds in Tillamook County. We make a little bit of money on it. We do, but it's not like a forest that's active in harvest. So
yeah, and I do want to just reiterate that with the purpose, a big part of the reason for this branding effort as a communication tool is to make sure that folks who recreate on our forest understand they're recreating on a working forest. Okay, that trail is going to go through the woods, and it's going to go through some older woods and a lot younger woods. But basically it's an actively managed landscape, and they should expect to see clear cuts. And we have really good working relationships with our user groups that we've developed over the years. The Tillamook used to be the Wild West back in the early 90s, and fortunately we've gotten a lot of improvement there. And I think it's just really good that we'll be able to continue to tell that story, because we get increasing pressures, especially from the east side Portland metro area, west side Portland metro area. I used to be a GIS guy, and folks come out, they recreate because they want to play in the woods, but they don't understand the story, of course. And so we need to really let them know, hey, this is a story that provides a lot of things, including, jobs. We work hard and we play hard here.
Yeah, Courtney, if you can hang on just a moment. I've been ignoring those online, especially our panelists. And I do notice that we have Bob Main has joined us. Bob, and I understand maybe you had your hand up, wanted to make a comment here at the same time.
Good afternoon, Chair Yamamoto.
Albert, how are you?
After Laura Frederickson is finished, then I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, perfect. I think Courtney had a question.
Just a comment that without a working forest, we can't pay for recreation. It doesn't pencil, and I know that you guys know that. But the second one was something that I've always wanted to see, and that's driving all of our highways. Yes, we see planted ends, but it would be nice to see a full story starting back in the 1940s or 1930s that say harvest, planted, so that they understand that this is an actual cycle. And then can I ask a financial question?
Sure.
Okay, so we were promised departure. Is that promise now off the table?
So the HCP was modeled with the net present value model, and that creates a departure that we try to constrain in some ways to make it somewhat realistic. I do not recall a promise of a departure.
Well, it was a different entity that no longer works here that promised departure to us.
So what we will be doing with the FMP is modeling various even flow scenarios, and then we will have some surplus then beyond even flow, and we'll then have to plan out how we take that. And so there could very well be some degree of departure early on in the period, but it may be prudent to hold some of that a little later and draw that out.
I mean, it's been readily recognized that Clatsop County is going to be the most impacted by this plan, and we are going to be facing the largest fiscal cliff regarding this plan. And so I'm just going to make note that it's an absolute travesty that there is not county representation on that scoping committee, because there is exponential job loss that we are facing. So I will continually request presence in the scoping committees for all of these plans.
Thank you, Courtney. Commissioner Sweet, you had a comment.
Very briefly, I know Bob Main has a comment that I was going to bring that up, but he'll take care of that. But my concern about recreation isn't what your intentions are. Your intentions are that it won't take away from the harvest base, but we have lots of examples where new people that weren't once interested in these lands in 1940 have now become interested in them. And I don't think recreation is immune from that very same thing happening. My concern is no matter what your intentions are now, there's going to be unintended consequences if people are encouraged to come use for free this wonderful facility that it'll create political pressures that will not be able to counter, and the counties and the other taxing districts will eventually lose because of that. I love having people in the forest, just great, but I think there's a risk. I don't know how you stop it.
Thank you, Commissioner Sweet. So Laura, do you have anything else for us?
No, I just appreciate the time, and no, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. So we're going to ask Commissioner Main to address us. Bob.
Good afternoon, Chair Yamamoto.
It is afternoon.
Commissioner Sweet has copies that I'm going to talk about. I brought this up before. When the county deeded most of our 7,000 plus acres to the state of Oregon through the Department of Forestry, we deeded under Chapter 478 of the Oregon Law of 1939, and that's why I bring it up, because this HCP looks like it's a direct conflict with our deed, because any other uses will not and does not impair or be injurious or detrimental to any purpose of this act, which is mostly harvest and regeneration. So I would go on record as saying HCP does not apply to our trust lands, and that I'm wondering if ODF through the state of Oregon has any plans on deeding back our property. Thank you, Yamamoto.
Thank you, Commissioner Maine. Any responses?
No, we don't have any plan on needing back the property. We don't have the mechanism to do it. Even if we wanted to.
Well, then we'll have to see what happens down the road.
Well, this is something that I'm not sure was brought up at trial, but I've seen a copy of the deeds that Coos County has, and it's very specific. I'm surprised. I am. So, again, I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to get involved with that. Okay. Courtney.
Do you by chance have Class County deeds? I'm curious now, since I
have not seen them, no.
new to this.
Might be good for you to go back and see if you can dig up those.
Well, we have a new
deeds.
county council, so that'll be, I get to meet him on Monday.
Perfect. Okay, good. Okay, and I apologize again. So the panelists online, I have been ignoring you, and that was not my intent. Do we have any last comments from anyone online?
Hearing none, Chair Yamamoto, Bob Maine again.
Go ahead, Bob.
For any help for any other county is that ours was deeded July 1st of 1940. That was just after the 1939 Act, Chapter 478. So somewhere in the late 39, 40, 41 would be where you want to look for transfer to the state of Oregon for ODF. It took me many days to find this particular deed in our county clerk's office.
Bob, can you repeat that chapter number again, please?
478.
Thank you so much.
But we deeded July 1st of 40, so it'd have to be after Chapter 478 was enacted in 1939, and probably before 41 or 42 when they had a revision to that.
Apologize.
Please, no,
Would you mind
please.
ask John De Lorenzo? He actually pulled most deeds. So he would have those deeds and would be available to get you copies this week.
Thank you.
Anyone else online? Any comments? Cal, I see you're you were unmuted. You have any comments for us?
No comments. I was going to respond to Bob's question, but I think we'll just leave it at that with what Mike said. And I just appreciate this time.
Oh, you can go talk. You go have lunch with them.
Yeah, I got to go get some lunch. So, but I appreciate the time, and I think anywhere we can include the counties, we will continue to try to do that. But I probably need to talk with my staff about that.
Thank you, Cal. Yes, Courtney.
One final financial question, sorry. Is the department still projecting to be solvent after the HCP?
Based on the modeling that we clearly have, cash flow and revenues that, have followed the same trends.
And the modeling is still 2019 modeling? When?
2020. Whatever it was in the lead up to the board meeting.
Okay, and maybe I just saw it in 2020 then, or 2019. Okay. So it's still the old stuff. Okay.
Any other comments, concerns? I've got just a couple. So on our call last Friday, you talked about the timeline for the update to the FMP coming up. Is that going to be a discussion with the Board of Forestry in November?
It's not specifically an item that's on the agenda. They have been made aware of it. As it is publicly out there on the website now. So there probably will be a question.
Okay. Okay. All right. Coho lawsuit. So Tillamook County and OFIC intervened in the Coho lawsuit. And there was an attempt by OJD, Department of Justice, to provide a settlement, which against our wishes, against both OFIC, I believe, and Tillamook County. The state went ahead and did that. It's my understanding that the plaintiffs rejected that offer and made a counteroffer. And I'm thinking, this is what I've heard, that OJD was not looking at entertaining the counter from the plaintiffs. Do you have any new information on the Coho lawsuit at all?
Not that I'm gonna share.
So one other question. So if there is some sort of an agreement with OJD and the plaintiffs on a proposed settlement, would that have to come before the Board of Forestry?
I don't know the answer, but that'd be an answer for lawyers.
So Cal, I see a quizzical look on your face out there. Do you have any information you would like to share with us?
You're muted.
I know. I have to, I'm not gonna explain why it's so difficult at times, but anyway, no, I don't have any comments, and I know that, I can't comment actually, so in some of this, but when we can, we will comment, so.
Yes, but when we settled the Maryland lawsuit, I don't believe it went to the board for a decision.
Right. Yeah, we just don't know, so.
I don't recall that at all.
How that
It
might
was
all
just
work.
reporting.
Right.
And that was really constrained until we had an outcome.
One final question. So the societal and economic studies done by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the HCP, I'm just so disappointed with that. Is there any method for us to have further study on the societal and economic impacts of the HCP on the trust counties?
We'll be bringing that as part of the FMP modeling outcomes.
Okay. So the FMP is going to do its own modeling based on different standards. Is that correct? Am I correct there?
It is correct. We would not use the same, and I can't really comment or speak to, really their analysis per se. But we will be doing an analysis that is consistent with what we do for our 714 analysis for rural impacts. And so in terms of job categories and stuff that are included, it's going to be consistent with what the Oregon Employment Department uses, which is consistent with what OFA uses.
I've used those numbers myself quite a bit. So I appreciate that. I do. So are you going to use 3 jobs per million board feet like was done in the HCP?
I don't know how the multipliers work out of those analyses, but they'll be in alignment with whatever the standard analysis that we do is.
So your standard analysis, I believe, has always been 10, 11, 12 jobs per million board feet.
That sounds like in the right neighborhood.
When the HCP came out, we were just bowled over by it, really.
We had very little influence on that analysis or involvement, so.
Well, you could object to it. Okay, sorry. Any other comments, questions?
Apologize, that was fabulous.
So we're way over time, and we have additional items on the agenda, but I think it's time for us to say thank you to the Department of Forestry. Thank you to everyone online. Thank you for those of you that came all the way to Salem today. It's greatly appreciated that we get this opportunity to sit face to face and have conversation. I think that's great. So, any objections to me adjourning this meeting at this point? Anyone online? Okay, time being 12:21 p.m. We're going to adjourn this Forest Trust Lands Advisory Council meeting. Thank you so much for attending today, and we will hopefully see everybody at the AOC annual conference, CFTLC annual meeting in mid-November in Eugene. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.